To implement the Venus Project, first we have to get people or influence people as to the advantages of the Venus Project. The implementation cannot be affected by myself or Roxanne. It can only be introduced by the majority of people if they identify with a direction. Now, I'm going to tell you what the Venus Project is about. If you really don't want war, poverty, hunger, depression, unemployment, or unnecessary human suffering, what we must do is declare the earth as the common heritage of all the world's people. That's number one. Then we have to take away all the artificial boundaries that separate nations. All nations, from my point of view, are basically corrupt. As long as they use money, there's always going to be political influences over different areas of the country. When few nations control most of the world's resources, you're going to have trouble. Every 20 years, you're going to have war, recession, the same problems over and over again, unless you declare the earth the common heritage of all the world's people. Now, I'm asking you to think about this. How did Britain get to be as powerful as they happen to be? Because they took land from other people. They weren't given that land. They say the sun never sets on England. Well, in the old days, it's because England stole a lot of land and exploited that. So did the Americans and French. We took this land by force and violence from Mexico, Spain, and took it away from the Indians. After we stole all the land we needed, we put up the sign, "Thou shalt not steal." Really, if you want a sane world without war, you can't use politics. Politics was great 100 years ago, but today we have to use the methods of science, not scientists, the methods of science applied to the social system, and move toward a resource-based economy. I'll try to tell you what that is. Okay. If you were stranded on an island with millions of dollars, and the island had no water, no fish, and no arable land, your money is of no use. What really counts in the world is not money, it's resources. Now, a lot of people say to me, well, what if we elected intelligent and humanistic people or ethical people in government? Even if you have the most ethical people in the world running governments, if you ran out of resources, be lying, cheating, stealing, and war. You can't end it by man making laws. Most man-made laws are completely irrelevant. In other words, when we sign treaties with other nations, if the treaty doesn't serve our interest or the interest of nations that sign them, they will violate those treaties. So it has nothing whatsoever to do with ethics. What the answers are lie in the domain of the intelligent management of the Earth's resources, using the methods of science. If you conduct a global survey of available resources, production plants, and the ability of people to solve problems, to work on these problems, by using a global survey, you can find out how much resources we have, and then we can design a society in accordance with the carrying capacity of the earth, not Jaque Fresco's opinions or anyone else's opinions. In other words, it's the carrying capacity of the earth that determines how many people can live in the world without starvation or creation of wars or territorial disputes. Territorial disputes are based upon people that do not have access to the necessities of life. If everyone had access to the necessities of life without a price tag, let me repeat that, without a price tag, there would be no basis for most crime. In other words, if people have access to musical instruments, cameras, it's cheaper to make things available than put people in prison. It costs $50,000 to keep a kid in prison, and believe me, they don't come out any better. $75,000 for an adult. Isn't it cheaper to educate people? Now think of this. Whenever you have territorial disputes, your government says, we've got to take care of the people that want to harm us. Why do people want to harm us in the first place? Because we abuse them sometime in history. We hurt them. No one turns against anyone else unless there's a history of some kind of problems. Now think about this again. If we have problems with other nations, it's always about resources. And we don't go to another country to try to bring democracy there, because we don't even have it here. There's never been a democracy anywhere in the world. Let me try to prove that to you. A true democracy would have our president criticize another country. When he's through criticizing that country, we would invite the prime minister of that country on the air to give his point of view. Then we would invite the prime minister of Sweden, who says they're both wrong. This is how I see it. That's what a democracy is. In a democracy, you would have all religion on the air, Saturdays and Sundays. And then you'd have atheism, agnosticism, all points of view. That's a democracy. I have never seen it practiced anywhere. Now, it has nothing in common with the New World Order. The New World Order is the people that manage and control the systems with themselves in charge. I'm talking about non-political systems. There is no government. There's no need for government. What there's need for is the distribution of resources to all the world's people and an education without a price tag. So people can go to any university without a price tag. They can live in homes as long as they like, but you don't own anything anymore. It's there for your use, just like automobiles are parked outside of cities and they're there for your use. You don't own anything anymore. The days of ownership requires protection, insurance, and the homes, all of them are fireproof in design, so you don't need any fire stations. And the aircraft are very different than they are today. They're built a certain way. Let's say if the landing gear doesn't come down, the fuel is then blown out, because most people are not killed by airplane crashes. They're killed by fire. So if you blow the fuel out with an inert gas, you don't have that problem. And if the landing gear doesn't come down, that triggers the mechanism that blows the fuel out. In other words, politicians don't know how to solve problems. Oh, they may be sincere, some of them may be honest, but they really don't know how to solve problems. They can say things that people like to hear. Like, if a politician discovered that the earth was round, he'd say to people that believe it was flat, I think it's a little round and a little flat. And that's not what science tries to do. If people believe the earth is flat, they show them the evidence to counterprove that it is not flat. Scientists don't try to get along with people. That's the business of politicians. What scientists say is what they find, regardless of how many people believe that the earth is flat. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I sell them on anything. Well, our language is old. It was designed hundreds of years ago. We still say to people, I'll see you at sunrise. The sun doesn't rise. The earth rotates in that direction. You see, when I say our language is old, it was designed a long time ago, and it has a lot of conflict in it, particularly the Bible. When somebody reads the Bible, they say, I think Jesus meant this. Another person says, oh, no, you got it all wrong. He meant that. That's why you have the Lutheran, the Seventh-day Adventist, the Catholic, all the different denominations, because the Bible is subject to interpretation. And the language that you use every day is subject to interpretation. So what we have to do is develop a language that's not subject to interpretation. It already exists. Chemistry, physics, engineering. When engineers talk to each other, people don't say, I think he meant this or I think he meant that. When you give a blueprint to Japan of an automobile, they turn out the same car if the specifications are all in the blueprint. That language is not subject to interpretation. If I were to design a bridge and the other engineers would read my reports on it and interpret it in their own way, that bridge would never come to fruition. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
The language of engineering, electronics, physics, chemistry, botany are all languages that are not subject to interpretation. And if you had such a language that was manifest, lawyers could not exist, because all they do is take language, twist it around into any way that would serve their interest. I'm not saying that a lawyer today is considered a good profession. In the future would be considered criminal. Other criminals would be judges and lawyers. All those people would be considered criminal. So would advertising, because this has nothing to do with the truth. It has to do with peddling a product. So the society you live in is basically unethical. Greed and power and ownership evolves in a scarcity society. If you lived in the South Pacific Islands, no one steals coconuts. There's so many of them. And when I pull in a net full of fish, they don't say, you owe me $1.50 or $3 for fish. They just throw fish to anyone standing there. That's called a resource-based economy. If you had the good fortune to go to the South Pacific Islands, I don't know about today, but years ago, they just fed you and gave you whatever you had need for without a price tag. Now look, if the human body worked in terms of the monetary system, suppose the brain said, I do all the thinking, I want most of the nutrients. The lungs would say, if I don't oxygenate the blood, you would die as a brain. So the brain says, what do you need? Everything you need, all the same nutrients, the same for the liver and the kidneys, and all the organs of the body get whatever they need. The brain can't exploit any organ of the body. Nature had already achieved this. The way people live today is based on scarcity, and all the business of money, all based on scarcity. And everyone in the monetary system is either a chiseler or a sucker. You consult your bank account to see what you are. So you see, there are people that gather all the money they can in a monetary system. It's called greed. It's the monetary system that produces greed. People do not oversupply materials that are abundant. If you live near a waterfall, no one steals water. It's so abundant that the air you breathe is absolutely abundant, and there's plenty of it, and absolutely essential for life, but there's no price tag on it, because there's so much of it, you can't monitor it. So what we have to do is produce an abundance and make it available to people, then they don't steal. Now, other forms of aberrant behavior, such as serial killers, killing, murderers, robbery, is all based on scarcity. People don't steal water, like I said, when they live near a waterfall. And people cannot conceive of heaven. They make God in their own image. If you really think about it, because people say, God so loveth the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that others might have eternal life and not perish. Well, let's be honest about that. The witnesses at the time said that Jesus arose and ascended into heaven. Therefore, there's no sacrifice. Do you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
What's a sacrifice? If they say he rose, came forth from his tomb, and ascended into heaven, there's no sacrifice there. So you see, they don't even know what they're reading. And also, if they remember, which they don't seem to remember, I'm talking about religious people, the Lord's Prayer says, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's no business in heaven, no private ownership, no money. They don't know what they're reading. They don't seem to understand these things. When they go to church, they give lip service to the teachings of Christ. Larry King once asked me what I thought of Christianity. I said, it's a great idea. When are they putting it into practice?
The children of the future won't have a need to make up mythical stories of the things that they don't have knowledge about in the universe. Just because they don't understand things, they won't make up stories. They'll learn to say, I don't know, and I put it in abeyance until we have further information. There won't be need for religion just because they don't understand things.
Well, all the technology would be managed by all the nations of the earth, and there's no more need for armies and navies if all the world has access to the necessities of life. When few countries control most of the resources, there's always going to be trouble. Do you understand that? If you educate people to learn how to find meaning in their own life, how to relate to one another, how to share ideas rather than ego, which tries to better oneself over another person. And people say to me constantly, they bring the same thing up, if people have access to their needs, they won't do anything. Look, just being born in America, you got the radio, the airplane, all of the things that you use, the electric light, cooking utensils, all of that was there for you. You got the earth, beautiful plants. You didn't do anything to make it come about. That doesn't hurt you.
Technology in the future without a social concern to better people's lives and enable them to relate to one another and be more productive is meaningless to us. So technology today is abusive because the bottom line is money. They don't care about people, just the bottom line. But in the future, in a resource-based economy, all technology would be beneficial to people in their growth.